afternoon. My name is Marianne. I am representing We the Kids. Our organization asks students to participate in our programs. We are here today with Amanda, a junior at Penn High School in Mishawaka, Indiana, and Rachel Ann, a junior homeschooler who will be interviewing Mr. Carlos May about his essay on the Constitution. Before we begin today's program, I would like to ask Mr. May to tell us a little bit about his background and how he became the Senior Executive Advisor to the Mayor of Indianapolis, Indiana.
Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate your time. How I became involved in politics, I suppose, and government in general was really rather roundabout. I went to college and then law school. My original intention was to go to the U.S. military afterwards and then join the U.S. Foreign Service and be a diplomat and represent the country abroad. But as oftentimes happens, life throws you a curveball. So really I came back after law school. I came back to Indiana. I'm from Indiana, fifth generation Hoosier. And I got a call from the Republican Party chair, and he'd said, hey, we need some help on these elections. I said, sure, I'm happy to help. And then they actually hired me full time. And so I was working on city county council races. And at that same moment, then candidate Ballard, now Mayor Ballard, was also running for office. He saw something in me and he said, you know, you come help me out. So I helped out on his campaign. Then I was on the transition team. Afterwards, he was inaugurated, and I was waiting for a call on the military, and he actually then hired me. So this is my third time working for the mayor. I've tried to quit twice before to go off and do other things, and he keeps sucking me back in, which means I suppose I'm doing something good for him. But that's pretty much how I became the mayor's Senior Executive Policy Advisor.
Thank you, Mr. May. Our first question will be asked by Rachel Ann. Then the girls will alternate back and forth asking questions. Rachel, you may ask the first question.
Hi, Mr. May. Thank you for being here with us today. My question is, why is James Madison called the father of the Constitution, and when and why did you write the constitutional essay?
Those are two-part questions, so let me take the second half first. So why did I write this and when did I write it? I was actually at the behest of We the Kids. At the time I was downtown Indianapolis and I was giving a speech on something or other. I'm not exactly sure what I was talking about at the moment. And your organization approached and said, hey, would you mind writing an essay on the Constitution? You really talk about that quite a bit. And I said, sure, I'm happy to. So that's pretty much why I wrote it. But once I wrote it, I realized that it was a very good, at least beginning piece to really find out my personal thoughts on the Constitution, its structure, its intent. Now to the first part of your question, James Madison, why is he considered the father of the Constitution? It's actually rather roundabout. So even when he was alive, Madison never claimed that he was the father of the Constitution. In fact, and I'm paraphrasing the quote here, but he pretty much said, I can't take credit for something that was born out of many people's minds. So for him, it was a collaborative effort. But why he has been and really is the father of the Constitution is all based on the Virginia Plan. So after the Articles of Confederation came in, which was the original thrust of government for the U.S. here, it didn't really work out, and we'll get to that later on, I know. But Madison was in Virginia at the time, and he wrote what's called the Virginia Plan. And that plan was, in essence, how to structure Virginia's government post the War of Independence and how they were going to move on in the future. They had done such a good job, or he specifically had done such a good job on that, that he called this Constitutional Convention so that all the delegates from all the states come in and discuss what is this new proposed system of government that we might have. So they utilized the basis of the Virginia Plan as the basis for the Constitution. And I use the word basis twice because really the Virginia Plan wasn't 100% complete. It was really an outline of what Madison thought the government of Virginia should be, which is now actually a Commonwealth. But all the delegates realized that, man, this guy is really sharp. And in fact, he was protege to Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson was in Europe as ambassador to France, he sent Madison all sorts of treatises and papers and books about different styles of government. And Madison, probably more so than any other founding father, really took to task, you know, I need to learn about government before I try to create one. And so of all the founding fathers, in my opinion, and I'm sure other historians might agree or disagree, but that's neither here nor there, that it was the basis of his knowledge, of his working structure from what he had done since he was Jefferson's protege, all the way up through the Articles of Confederation, and then the actual Constitutional Convention. Because we have to remember that if it wasn't for Madison, the Constitutional Convention wouldn't have even been held. The reason it was able to be held, because New York especially was organized anti-federalists, and so they really didn't want a stronger centralized government, which the Constitution now gives us. He pretty much alone persuaded George Washington to attend. Once everybody realized that Washington is going to be there, you know, we better show up too. And so that was the impetus for this Constitutional Convention, was Madison getting Washington there. Once they're there, they utilize this Virginia plan as the outline and structure, the scaffolding, if you will, of the Constitution that we currently have today. So all of that in one is basically why he wrote it. But I have a quote specifically on this that I want to read real quick. Madison wrote this in one of the Federalist articles, which I know we'll get to in a bit as well, but he wrote, "A crisis had arrived which was to decide whether the American experiment was to be a blessing to the world or to blast forever the hopes which the Republican cause had inspired." Now, that's Republican with a small r, because we're talking about a republic. And so it was that phrase, that sentence, that quote, in my opinion, which was the driving instigator for this new Constitutional Convention in 1787, and then basically giving us what we have today.
It's nice to meet you, Mr. May.
Likewise.
In your essay, you quoted Benjamin Franklin as he walked out of signing the Constitution. When asked by a woman, "Mr. Franklin, what have you given us?" and he replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Can you explain what you think he meant?
Yeah, obviously I'm not a mind reader, so I don't know exactly what he meant, but here's what I take from it. In that one phrase, I guess I should start at the beginning. Everyone is in Philadelphia. They know, the people, the populace knows that this group of individuals in this building here, they're doing something. We don't know what it is, but we know it's going to set the course of our country all into the future. And so there was a big buzz of excitement. When Franklin walked out, and Franklin was probably, aside from Washington, probably one of the most famous. I'd say it was Washington, Jefferson, and then Franklin, in terms of just renown and fame with the general population. So he walks out, and this lady asks, "What have you given us?" And he says, as you just quoted, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Now, I added the emphasis myself. And why I add that directly answers your question. I think that what he was intending was to give us two things: hope and responsibility. Hope that we have this phenomenal new system of government which had never, ever been attempted before in the history of mankind. I mean, the United States alone, amongst all the nations of the world, is the first one founded on an idea. Every other nation was founded due to war or a king or heredity or pick and choose. But this one was completely founded on an idea, and that idea was, how can the citizen, the individual, the person, determine their own future with relations to a government, right? And so they looked at that, and they really thought about it hard. So to get back to the hope versus responsibility, the hope was that we now have a system of government which had never been attempted before, first off, but second, and more importantly, which was for the first time in human history going to give power not to the government, but to the people of that country. Because again, keep in mind, this had never been done before. It had never even been thought of before. It was always the government is there to tell you what to do. Never was it the people are here to tell the government what to do. So there's the hope aspect. The responsibility comes from the final part of that quote where he says, "if you can keep it." And again, I added that emphasis because it is up to us as citizens to make sure that we keep what was given to us. And you have to think of the Constitution as the scaffolding of a just government. And it's the scaffolding because it just sets the framework, if you will. It doesn't give the specifics, it sets the framework. And it's up to us to make sure that that framework stays solid. And we're not here to talk politics specifically, but take a look at what's going on with anything. Privacy, one of the big things right now, especially with all these photo leaks of the stars, the Hollywood folks. Privacy was something that was never taken as a real right or privilege of a citizen, of a constituent of a government, right? It was always just, hey, we're the government. If we want to go into your house, by golly, we'll just go into your house, and it's as simple as that. And so the responsibility is upon us to make sure that we keep these things which have made us what we are from here on to the future. If we don't do that, if you don't do that, if you don't do that, if I don't do that, then what we have had up until today will cease to exist. So to summarize rather succinctly here, it's a two-part process. I think he was giving us hope because we had this republic for the first time, but also a responsibility because it's up to us to keep it. Mm-hmm. If we don't do it, it'll go away of its own accord.
For those who do not know, can you please explain the difference between a republic and a democracy?
Yeah, at its most basic, a democracy is the rule of people, and a republic is the rule of law. Now, oftentimes you will hear politicians today, especially, unfortunately, at the federal level, talking about our democracy, this great democracy, this democracy that we live in. You know, it just shows their own lack of understanding of the own government that they claim to lead. We are not a democracy. Our country was never instituted, thought of, or created to be a democracy. Democracy, as I said, at its most basic is the rule of the people. Another way to think of that is mob rule. And what happens is that it becomes the rule of the majority. The mob then rules what's going to happen. A republic, again, is the rule of law. Our law is the Constitution. And what the Constitution does is it protects the rights of the minority, however you want to define that minority, but of the smaller group of people. It protects their rights from the will and fickle vagaries of the majority, which is what a democracy is. So if you were to look at the government today and say, we're a democracy, you would be completely incorrect. If you were to look at the country and say, we are a republic, you're almost there. What we are is a federal republic, because we have states that are sovereign states, and then we also have the federal government, which supersedes these sovereign states in very specific ways. And so we have this federalist style of a republic, hence a federal republic.
Could you please discuss Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and its importance in our federal government?
Yeah, this is, without a doubt, how shall I phrase this most properly? It is the rule book for the federal government. So Article 1, Section 8 and the 10th Amendment actually go together. They should be looked at not exclusively but inclusively as one and the same thing, just looking at it slightly differently. So Article 1, Section 8 lays out the very specific enumerated powers of the federal government. And there's a host of them, but it basically says that this right here, federal government, is what you are required and responsible to do for us, the citizens and the nation, right? The 10th Amendment is the add-on to that, because you'll hear oftentimes legislators, I'm talking mostly federal level here, right? So U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, or the President. They will say, well, you know, the Constitution is silent on this issue. So obviously that means we're in charge, right? Because it doesn't say we cannot do it. Well, therein again, you see the legislator and his or her lack of understanding as to what this nation is. The 10th Amendment buttresses Article 1, Section 8 by stating, and I'm paraphrasing here, those powers not specifically granted to, nor prohibited by the states, are reserved to the states and the people. So what that meant is, if the federal government is looking at something, let's just pick a congressman. Congressman A is looking at something, and he says, you know, I really want to make a law on this. Well, is it in Article 1, Section 8? You know, if it's not, chances are they shouldn't be doing it. If it is, they must be doing it. States, like Indiana, shouldn't be, because that is a federal responsibility versus a state responsibility. But a lot of times they say, well, it's not in there, so obviously we need to take advantage of it. Or they'll say, you know, man, way back when the country was founded, they didn't have airplanes, so of course we need to regulate this. And they use a couple of specific areas that I'll talk about in just a second in Article 1, Section 8 to say this is why we should be doing it. One of them is known as the elastic clause. It's actually the necessary and proper clause. So all laws that are necessary and proper to the execution, ... So they use that first phrase and they say, well, it's right there. What they don't do is look at the 10th Amendment. So what the 10th Amendment does is, if the federal government is not specifically in charge of it, and we know that because it's in Article 1, Section 8, then the states can do it. But maybe the states don't want to do it. They don't have to. That's fine. The federal government, however, should not intrude upon things that should be looked at the state, or even better, at the local city level. But they do it a lot. So that is what Article 1, Section 8 is. The importance is paramount to the Constitution because it specifically lays out what the enumerated powers of the federal government are. And there's a lot of them, but the most important, the top three, really in my opinion, as I said, first is the necessary and proper clause. So to make laws which shall be necessary and proper. That's the first one. The second one would be the interstate commerce clause. And the third one is the taxation clause. So without taxes, obviously the federal government wouldn't operate. And in fact, that was one of the main issues as to why the Articles of Confederation didn't work, was because of one of those things in Article 1, Section 8.
Okay, now that we're on this subject, can we discuss the Articles of Confederation and what they are?
Yeah, so Articles of Confederation was the very first style of, not style is the wrong word, system of government that the United States of America had. So, 1776 and independence and all that. The United States of America as it is today didn't even exist until after 1787. So what happened in between those years? Well, what happened was the Articles of Confederation. What it did is actually in the definition, a confederation. So the Articles of Confederation, the articles, obviously articles being what they wrote down, a confederation of states is what they were getting at. So it was each state of the original 13 colonies that then became states, each state was equal to every other state. And so they didn't want to say, well, one state's more important than the other state, so let's drop these Articles of Confederation. Let us create the United States as a confederation of states. I guess that's a good concept, it's a good idea. The problem was that because they were trying this for the very first time, they had no way of knowing how to actually execute anything like that. So what's one relevant example of this? Well, we just got out of this war, right, to become the United States of America. Each state was supposed to pony up a certain amount of money and a certain amount of troops. Well, the troops they did. Each militia from each state banded together and formed a larger and larger grouping until we finally had the national army, if you will, at that point in time. But then how do we pay those folks? And not only that, all the other debts that we accrued from having to build ships, get the cannonballs, get the musket balls, order new muskets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that money came from foreign governments. Specifically, France was one of the big boys. They really loaned us a lot for our war against England. Now, they weren't doing this because they really cared about America, so to speak. They just really kind of wanted to stick it to Britain at the time. And so they're like, we're going to help these guys out, and we're going to not help them out. Well, how are we then going to pay back these loans? So the Articles of Confederation are drawn up, and everyone is saying, okay, states, give us your money. Well, why? Was basically the state's answer. Well, why should we give it to you? You don't have any authority over us. You don't have any power over us. So we'll get it to you when we feel good about it. Have you guys ever loaned a dollar to a friend and they're like, I'll get you back tomorrow. Tomorrow rolls around, then the next week, then the next week. It's that same concept, right? Unless there is a rule or a structure in place to make them do that, they're probably just not going to do it. And that's exactly what happened here. The Articles of Confederation was a very loose networking of the states, and it basically gave zero power to this federal government that had been created. And so there was no teeth in this document. States didn't care, they weren't going to do it. And so that really just wasn't going to work. So I hope that answered the question. It was a really vague, nebulous answer, but it's because the articles were so worthless that the nation in 1781 basically was not going to continue on. I mean, already it was falling apart. And in fact, some of the states were saying, well, why don't we just form our own regional network here? So like Georgia and Virginia, for example. Why don't we just get together and create our own little government? Some states were actually saying, why don't we align ourselves with France or with Denmark? So they actually wanted to become a part of a completely different country's governmental system. And it was all because Articles of Confederation weren't doing a good job of keeping us as one cohesive unit. I mean, the Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. That was the intent of the Articles of Confederation. It just didn't execute it properly. It was so weak that everyone realized we had to do something else.
Very few people understand the Federalist Papers and why they were written and by whom. Could you please tell us about these historical documents?
Yeah, so a lot of people, well, actually, let me take a step back. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote a book when he was traveling through America, through the U.S. Well, it was before it was the U.S., the colonies at the time, right? So he was traveling through there, and he thought, well, this group of people is so unique, they're so different from any other peoples that I have visited that I should write a book on them. And he did. That book was a purely political treatise on what the people are, why they are so unique. But what he was referencing was our uniqueness, not just as a people, frontier and coming out, working hard, making something of yourself, but also our government. Now, at the time that the Constitution was being debated, there was a huge fight going on. There was two camps, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists wanted a federal republic, this federal system of government that we talked about earlier. The Anti-Federalists did not. They knew that the Articles of Confederation weren't going to work, but they were very, very afraid of centralizing too much power into one authority, that one authority being a federal government. Now, I can understand why, because they just fought a war to get out from underneath a monarch. They had come from countries where the monarchy was the only system of government for centuries, if not millennia, oftentimes. And so they were very fearful of having a president who then became by default the very first king of America. They were very afraid of that. Nowhere more so than in New York. I mean, these people were everywhere, but New York was the area where they were the most organized and the most efficient. And so they were really fighting this. So now to the Federalist, which is the actual name of it. We now know them as the Federalist Papers, but in reality they are the Federalist. What it was a series of 85 articles written and published by a few different people, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. Madison was probably the most prodigious author of the Federalist, right? But what these were, it wasn't a political, like, oh, this is what this is, or oh, I'm going to create this whole new system of government and let me explain what it is. This was political in terms of, I want to get people to understand why I back this, is what James Madison was saying, and John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. And so we should write these papers to sway the argument away from the Anti-Federalists and towards the Federalists, so that we can have this document now known as the Constitution that we've been working on for so long. So it was 85 articles. They were published independently, like one after the other, and then they were finally compiled into one massive book, if you will, called the Federalist. Again, this was done to help push the ratification of the Constitution. So these authors were under the gun to put out these papers and publish them very quickly. But it wasn't just publishing because, well, people might not read them. So they buttressed the writing by going out, and Madison was a horrible speaker in comparison to some of the other, luminaries, the oratorical kings, if you will. He was one of the smartest guys, but he just couldn't speak in public very well. So he actually sent out all these other proxies and said, hey, go talk to the people about what it is that I wrote, so that they can understand why I back this and why I think that they should back it. So at its most basic, the Federalist Papers were an argument in favor of ratifying the Constitution, and not just that, hey, I'm in favor of it, but why am I in favor of it?
Okay. How can we, the people, keep our civil liberties and our freedom that the signers of the Constitution promised us?
You have to get involved, first and foremost. So how do you get involved? Well, first thing is you should actually study a little bit of our history. Most people, most elected officials have no clue of what type of government we live in. You hear them. In fact, I won't mention names. Again, this is not a political show, but there was a very senior United States senator who was in front of the Capitol, and he's on national TV. I mean, everyone, all the networks are there, and he's talking about our great democracy, and then he turns and he stops and he says, and I'm quoting specifically verbatim what he says, and so he says, I guess I didn't mean to say even it was a he, but it was a guy senator, and so he says, our Constitution says it, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And I'm looking at the TV, I'm thinking, well, no it doesn't, you dummy. That's actually the Declaration of Independence, a completely different document than the Constitution. But the point is that if we've got senior folks, I mean, these are the leaders of our nation, and they have no clue as to what our government is, imagine the 17, 18, 19-year-old person who is just becoming an adult, just figuring out what they want to be or do in life, are they really going to have you know, a whole lifetime's worth of history and experience and knowledge behind them? No, probably not. So to get back to it, getting involved is really the way to do it. But how do you get involved? First, as I said, you educate yourself on what it is to live in the United States of America, what it is to have our system of government. Second, you should get involved by paying attention to politics. I mean, politics is a nasty, brutish business, right? It kind of reminds me of John Locke, one of the political theorists that really influenced our founding fathers, and he created what's called the state of nature. And he says the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short. That's exactly what politics is. It's nasty, brutish, and short. So you have a lot of folks that, let me phrase it to you another way. We oftentimes, as citizens, we will say, we want the best and brightest to be our congressman, our senator, our president, or whatever, right? But then, in that same breath, they turn around and say, but all these politicians are the same. They're only after themselves, so why am I going to get involved? Therein lies the hypocrisy of our democracy. Even though we're a republic, hypocrisy of our democracy sounds a little bit better. The hypocrisy is this: we want the best and brightest, but we come to expect, and even worse, accept, substandard representation at the federal level. And we do this because not everybody, I'm talking very general here, we people sometimes think, well, I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't want to seem like I don't care, and so I'll just say something, or I just won't get involved. It's one of the two extremes, right? So what happens is we keep electing people that shouldn't be there. I mean, look at the congressional approval rating right now, approximately 11%. That means 9 out of every 10 people do not like what Congress is doing, yet over 90% of incumbents are going to go back. Why is that? Oh, well, it's every other congressman and senator except for mine. I mean, logic tells you that that cannot be, right? It's got to be more than just one is doing a bad job. In fact, I posit that most of them are doing a bad job. If you educate yourselves and then you get involved in politics, you can start to effect change in a much more positive and a much more influential way. So how do you get involved, though, in politics? Volunteer for a campaign. If you find someone that you like as a candidate, make some phone calls for them, stuff some envelopes for them, walk a neighborhood, a precinct, because what that will do is it will enable you to see the most basic grassroots, ground level style of representation that we've got. I mean, we are unique in this regard amongst many, many nations in that, you know, we take our primaries seriously. Everybody gets out there and you walk the doors, you knock on doors, you send mailers out. So you really should get involved. But third and finally, I think, in terms of what can we do to keep our civil liberties, the moment the elected officials start to take it away, the moment they start to say, well, we're going to go ahead and just do this, you need to stand up and yell and say no. Because for them, silence is acquiescence. They're just going to say, great, no one said anything negative, so yeah, we're just going to go ahead and do this. And then we do it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, what did they do that for? Well, you heard they said they were going to do this, yet you didn't stand up. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Everybody's heard that. You should be the squeaky wheel. Stand up, yell if you need to. Not literally, figuratively, stand up and yell and say, no, we're not going to do this. So that's pretty much what I would recommend.
Okay. From the Constitution, do you agree with how the Electoral College was adapted to choose the President of the United States?
This is a very good question. I guess first step is we should explain what the Electoral College is. So when you vote for President of the United States, you're actually not voting for the President. What you're doing is you're voting for the elector, and each state has different amount of electors based on their population. You're voting for the electors to go out and cast their vote for President. That's why whenever you're seeing the presidential election, there's two. It's like Electoral College votes, have they hit the 270 mark, and then popular votes. That's why we had in 2000, Gore v. Bush had to be decided by the Supreme Court because one person had won the popular vote, Al Gore, but the other person had won the Electoral College vote, George Bush. Well, okay, they need to decide. So basically, the Electoral College is a group of people that are unelected that cast the official ballots for President of the United States after the people cast their ballots. in practical effect, if the state of Indiana goes for president candidate A and they win that state, pretty much all the electors are going to go ahead and throw in their votes for that person. But by law, they don't have to, right? So we could vote for one person and they could say, you know what, all these people are stupid, and so we're going to actually vote for the other person because we know better than they do. And that actually brings me to the point of the question is, at the time when the Electoral College was instituted, I think that, yes, I do agree with why they instituted it. Now, I don't see the need so much to have the Electoral College. Why do I say that? At the beginning, education was not something that everybody did. Most people, maybe they went to like a year or two of grade school, but then it's, you know, go to the fields and make sure the farm is trucking along and let's get to work, and, you know, that's about it. In fact, the reason why our school year is set up the way it is today was based on the agrarian cycle way back when. So, I mean, even that, like, do we even need to have the same calendar? No, we don't, because most of you guys go home after school and go work on the farms? I mean, no, right? So very few people do that now, so we could modify that. But I digress. That's neither here nor there. At the time, though, that was the main thrust. Education was not that important. Folks didn't understand, didn't pay attention. Communication was not at all what it is today. I mean, now, you know, you pull out your phone, you tweet something, and someone in Algeria knows what you just said, right, within a second. Way back when, it took days to get a letter from one place to the other, or months to get a letter from one side of the world to the other side of the world, right? So it took a lot longer time. So folks didn't understand what it was they should be doing. All the educated folks, all the founding fathers decided that, look, we should make sure that there is some balance perceptually on electing our presidents, because we don't want someone to just come in and everybody votes for him when really they're here to do something bad, whatever that something bad might be. So back then, I see the Electoral College as almost a necessary evil, where folks, if they don't even understand what's happening, how can we trust them to make the right decision? And I guess there is the corollary nowadays, that people rarely pay attention, so maybe we should keep the Electoral College. Well, going back to the prior question, if folks like you guys get involved early on, educate yourselves, really there would be no need to have an Electoral College. And quite frankly, I don't see a need now, because we could easily directly vote for our president. I mean, we do, right? We go in and cast a ballot. Way back when, you had to travel, I don't know, 50 miles to the nearest ballot box, and then you had to cast it. And are you sure that's really going to go? So, I mean, it was a factor of the times. The times now are not what it was back then. Do we need it now? Yes and no. It depends, I guess, is my real answer. It depends. Most of my answers are always it depends on, because there's a lot of nuances in there. If everyone knew everything that was going on, we wouldn't need it. Very few people know what's going on. Maybe we still need it. I don't think so. It's one of those that it's a necessary evil at this moment.
Okay. Here's another question for you.
All right.
How important is the First and Second Amendment to the Constitution in America today?
Well, it's very important. They're both very important for two different reasons. One, they are the First and Second Amendment, but also the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights for the Constitution. And so it's like a check plus, right? The Bill of Rights is that extra little power that we put in. And in fact, Madison at the time didn't see the need for a Bill of Rights, because he thought the way we're going to write this Constitution should take care of it. And so it was a lot of the other founding fathers that said, no, before we're going to jump on board and say yes to your proposed Constitution, we want to make sure that we enshrine that we have this Bill of Rights. So the first two amendments, I mean, there's more than one thing in them, right? Freedom of religion, press, etc., the right to bear arms, which was actually specifically tailored for militias at the time. And it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that Supreme Court started to equate the Second Amendment as an individual amendment, when it was originally intended as a militia amendment, right? For specifically the right to bear arms. But let's take it at a more practical, easier to discuss level. The freedom of speech. If we cannot say something against our government, we are not a republic. We're not anything even near democratic. What we are is anything but that, right? The freedom of the press. If you look at England, well, I guess the UK, really, to be most precise, if you look at the UK, Spain, and a lot of the other monarchies at that point in time, there was no such thing as the freedom of the press. It was the royalists would put out whatever information they wanted, and by golly, that was law, that was the word, and there was nothing else. Well, here in America at that time, the printing press was really coming on strong, and a lot of people were so excited about that. And the Founding Fathers realized that if we don't allow something like this, we're going to be no better than the country that we just fought against. So we need to have something else. Hence the freedom of press. Then freedom of religion. Really, I say that generally, it's that the government will make no establishment of religion, which translates to freedom of religion. That was incredibly important because the reason that the Pilgrims came over here was because they were being persecuted back in their country for their religion. Now, we had seen firsthand what a government-driven religion can do. The Church of England at the time, I mean, the Church of England broke off from the Catholic Church because Henry VIII wanted a divorce, and the Pope wasn't going to grant it to him. So he says, you know what, I don't care, I'm just going to create my own church now, and everybody is going to pray to the Church of England, and that's how it's going to be done. Well, America and the Founding Fathers didn't want that because the Pilgrims had that same issue then over there. So they come here and they want that freedom of religion. Now, the Second Amendment, specifically when we're talking about the right to keep and bear arms. The right to keep and bear arms, as I said a little bit ago, it was originally instituted as a right for the states because states had state militias that were basically the armed group of people that fought if there was ever any issue. In fact, we get that from Latin, arense arato, which means the sword and the plow, which means the citizen soldier. And we get that even from the Roman Empire, right? When you're done with your duty, you put down your sword, you go back home, you pick up your plow, and you're a citizen again. What we had seen, though, what the Founding Fathers, I should say, had seen, was that in other nations, governments that didn't like what the people were doing would take away their weaponry, their arms, and then all of a sudden, well, what happens? You know, if you've got a massive army marching towards you and you've got a stone, you're probably going to get shot up, right? In America, we wanted to make sure, the Founding Fathers, I should say, wanted to make sure that the federal government could never easily control the population like they had been controlled in the past. And so they said, we need to have this right to bear arms so that the citizens can protect themselves from the government. Not so that I can protect myself from you or whoever else is watching, but so that we, the citizens, can protect ourselves from the encroachment of the government. Like I said, it wasn't until the NRA really started pushing the Supreme Court in the 60s and 70s that the Supreme Court started to look at the Second Amendment as an individual right versus this larger right of the populace to fight against the government should the government ever become oppressive or tyrannical. So, in summary, those are very important amendments, two of the most important, and they were put in, I think, in order and in the Bill of Rights because the Founding Fathers wanted folks to realize that, hey, this is something that we need to pay attention to, or else this government that protects the rights of the minority will turn into a government that dictates privileges to a minority, privileges that can then be taken away at any time should the majority choose to change their mind. And that right there is what has started a lot of ills on this planet. And so I think our Founding Fathers got it right, personally.
Okay, my last question is, what message would you send to the youth of today?
If I had to put it into one kind of summarizing phrase, I would say this. Life, everything that you guys see around you was created by people no smarter than you. So you can get out there and effect change much earlier and much more directly than any one of you would have thought possible. And you're like, well, I'm a kid. I'm only 16, or I'm only 17, or I'll be 18 next month. You know, I'm going to be an adult here soon. Don't think that just because you have youth or inexperience on your side that you cannot do something good. You just have to realize, as I stated, that this thing that we call life and everything around it was created by people no smarter than you or I are. And so if they could do it, we can do it too. But get out there, pay attention, become part of the solution. Don't worry about what the next color lipstick is or what the next new video shoot 'em up game is coming out. Pay attention to what's going on that affects your day-to-day life, but not only that, what's going to affect your future life. So that would be the message I'd give them, I suppose.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, speaking of future plans, do you have any specific future plans for running for office?
It depends. As I stated, that would be most of the answers. It depends on this. There are two types of politicians in my mind. Those that want to do something and those that want to be somebody. The vast majority are just people who want to be somebody, right? I actually want to do something. So if an office opens up or if a need opens up and people look at me and say, Carlos, you would be the right person to help fix this need, then I would certainly consider it. But I'm not just looking for the next office to run to just because I want to see my name on the ballot. I want to make sure that if I do something, it's because there is something that needs to be done.
I really respect you for that. I really like that.
Every now and again I get it right.
Now I would like to present two things to you on behalf of We the Kids.
Excellent.
First, it's a We the Kids t-shirt.
Nice. Make sure you show it on the camera.
On the
there.
camera. This for you.
Appreciate it. And just in case you missed it, it has We the Kids here in the lower section. Nice little touch. I like that.
And also the book by David Bowman, What Would the Founding Fathers Think? This book is hilarious. I think you will love it.
I think I will too. I'll have to definitely check it out. I appreciate it, ladies. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for the gifts.
Thank you for being here.
Certainly.
And now I want to give it back to Marianne.
On behalf of We the Kids, I would like to thank Mr. Carlos, May, Amanda, and Rachel for being with us today. For more information about We the Kids, please go to www.wethekids.us.